Hi everybody, and thanks a million for joining us today and tuning in. I'm so delighted to be joined by Tim Lombard, who's a senator in the Shannon. We're so delighted to have him on board for all the dyslexia awareness advocacy work that Tim does. So today's video, we're linking in with obviously Dyslexia Awareness Week 2020. So taking place a lot of online events this year, obviously because there's limited face-to-face interaction. So we're so delighted to have Tim on board for providing some suggestions. So Tim, thanks a million for joining us.
Great to be here, Una.
Great. So Tim, you had a meeting yesterday which looked at lots of different topics and suggestions around creating awareness and creating, I suppose, change and movement. So maybe talk us through some of the things that's going on at the moment and some of the plans that are being put in place.
Yeah, traditionally in the Oireachtas, I would have always done my best to actually, for Dyslexic Awareness Week, arrange meetings between the association, the Irish Dyslexic Association of Ireland, and the actual department and the minister. Yesterday was Dyslexic Awareness Day, and at 11 o'clock we would have met the actual minister itself, Minister Madigan, actually, who was direct responsibility for this remit. And it was a very important meeting because it was the first meeting actually with the new minister, but there was key issues that we need to discuss, issues around teacher training, issues around self-esteem, and particularly for people who are dyslexic, and also issues about technology and the real need that technology needs to be a real part of the solution. So it was a very positive meeting, but we have an awful lot of work to do. The review of the actual policy regarding technology is very important for us. At the moment, you need an assessment, which is, if you go privately, is quite expensive. It could be up to €650. And if you're to go publicly, you could be waiting any up to 2 years for minimum. So that need for that assessment is a real issue, and it's a real barrier for people actually getting the grant to actually get the technology. And how I always describe the technology, and I've seen it at home in my own house, it's like a hearing aid. It's that ability, so for people to actually understand and see and hear what's actually happening on the page. And I think it's a real barrier, and I think we just need to make sure that technology becomes one of the real important parts of the actual solution here itself. Self-esteem, look, we all know the issues around people who are dyslexic with self-esteem. And we kind of reinforce that issue again to the minister, that mental health is a really, really important part of this. Building up people's self-esteem about these issues, like this terrible kind of analogy, oh, you must be stupid if you're dyslexic. You're probably on the complete other spectrum. You're probably one of the brightest in the actual class, but you just see things differently. So there's an awful lot of work to be done there.
There's a huge growth in stats, Tim. I'm sure you're aware from the mental health correlation with people with learning difficulties. It's so massive now. Obviously, there's a huge growth in mental health anyway. I think it's like 1 in 2 will probably experience it at some point or be somewhat connected. But it's nearly a guaranteed as well now, which is quite worrying for any element of learning difference, to have some form of health implication. Because I suppose what the way we see it as is that we're in a little box and trying to get through a system for so many years, either if you're going from 5 to 18, which is minimum, really generally speaking, unless if you progress on to further education, you're spending so much of your childhood and your developmental years in a very rigid system that just wears away at you, really. So it is quite a shocking stat that's the way things are going.
Yeah, and I think, in many ways we are making progress, in particular in the last 5 years, but there's a massive cohort of society that have gone through education, the adults in particular, and how we engage with them now is going to be a real test for us, because you rightly spoke about the mental health issue and the self-esteem issues. That's just not at the actual young age. That goes all the way through
Very
society.
true. Yeah,
and I think it's how we actually hopefully engage and bring that cohort of people back into the system, so we can actually show them how to actually survive in society itself. And you're dead right, it's that box system. This is how you do it, you can't do it any other way. It can't happen. We have to just kind of change our approach. And like, if 1 in 10 people are dyslexic, that's 3 in every classroom. And how many times have we gone and met a teacher and said, oh, it's the first child I've met who's dyslexic in my class, and you're going, probably 2 others that you just haven't met today. So that teacher training, and that ability for it to be on the curriculum for teachers. So number one, for the new brand of teacher coming in, which are probably becoming more equipped than the older brand of teacher, but the continuous training for teachers is very, very important.
Massive. It's so vital. Obviously, that's the main point of contact, really, from a learning and development. Obviously, you do a huge amount at home, and I suppose there's a proportion of time both spent at home and in school, but they're your two main environments as you're growing up as a child and into teenage years, is being at school for X amount of hours and being at home. So it really has a huge, valuable impact from that teacher awareness perspective. And there's so many phenomenal teachers that are really on it. But then as obviously there's a limit in capacity, there's so many numbers, how can they, give specialized help and all of those type of things. But a general overall awareness of maybe different strands of dyslexia and bits of those to be incorporated into their learning program is vital, because there's so many kids that I work with now directly, and their teacher, let's say in their mainstream classroom, has actually received no qualification, no training at all. There's no module, there's no specific learning element in their degree.
And that's what we were talking to the department about yesterday, about the continuous development for these teachers. They need access, need pathways, they need training courses. And look, unfortunately, this COVID crisis has kind of delayed how, in particular, the Dyslexic Association of Ireland can roll out them to the actual teachers that want to actually get involved. But that's the kind of conversation we need to have. How can we, number one, work with the actual students so we can build up their self-esteem, but number two, empower the teachers so they have the knowledge, they have the ability. And we don't need assessments to be done by psychologists in many ways. The teachers in the classroom are the most appropriate people to do that. And the majority of them know if there's an issue. But I just think we need to give those teachers that kind of ability and that kind of background and that kind of support so they can go and do what they're supposed to be doing. And they do very well, most of them, which is actually inform and teach the actual child.
Yeah, and it's so vital, empowering that teacher element, as you mentioned, to carry out and change the system for assessments and to them to carry out. That would be so vital. You also mentioned the Dyslexia Association, so obviously we both tie in with them quite a good bit, and they're so great during this time. Obviously, they can't do any face-to-face, but there's online teacher training, there's online parent training. A few of them, actually, the courses I've done myself over the last, subsequent months. So vital, a platform that they have been able to pivot, along with an office move that they're trying to manage as well during a pandemic. So it is a hugely valuable resource, and definitely a real touch point for so many kids and so many families across Ireland to link in with them. So I definitely know that they're trying to move towards that pace. You can do a training kind of course with them to go to, let's say, higher education, to, let's say, carry out an informal assessment with people, let's say, at third level institutes. So it is definitely moving in that way through bodies and through people like yourself trying to create the change.
One of the issues that we have at the moment is, because of the COVID issue, these kind of workshops that are traditionally held by Dyslexic Association, like Clonakilty of theirs on a Monday, they're not happening at the moment because there's unusual protocols in place in the schools at the moment. And they give children the access, number one, to actually meet other kids, so they're not the only one in the actual school in their view that are dyslexic. But the backup for the parents is understated totally. It's literally a support group for parents. If there's an issue, even if how to work the iPad around getting the information out and how is it done. We're not all brilliant on iPads, but that kind of information is really important. So I do think unfortunately there's a gap there at the moment because of COVID. And look, we spoke about Zoom earlier on. We probably have to go back into that kind of form again, unfortunately, to try and actually help parents, because it's about information, it's about informing them, and it's about working with them, because obviously they need a bit of support too, because this is it's an issue for the house, it's an issue for the child, it's an issue for the actual community.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a topic we've linked in with quite a good bit over the last while, Tim, of that, yes, let's say a child or a student is having that learning element, but from a parent perspective, what supports can they get? Because it's really vital, obviously, that the student or the child gets support in education or in whatever their goals needed to be met. But definitely from a support aspect from a parent, What do they need to maybe be following up with? All of those things. So there's so many different avenues. It is very difficult to try and manage that path.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate issue with this COVID issue. You don't have that actual connection at the moment.
Mhm.
Like, parents are trained in different things. Obviously, they have their own occupation, whether they're a nurse or a farmer or whatever, but there's very few of them trained as actual teachers themselves, or even have the knowledge of how to work with a child who's dyslexic. So I do think, it's one of the things we discussed yesterday, how we can work with the schools, and we're now writing to the schools to say, look, can we accommodate them? Can we ensure that these meetings happen? And we're also looking for the department to support us, because we need to have some financial support along that way, because there's going to be extra costs with these meetings. And they're already, another burden on families that have kids who are dyslexic itself.
Yeah, definitely lots of scope for change. That's the thing, I suppose. Yes, we're identifying where there's gaps at the moment and how we can basically move forward and how we can propose plans. Obviously, things don't happen overnight. And of course, we have a pandemic situation at the moment, so things are taking probably a bit longer than what we would like them to. However, it still is gradually moving in the right direction, hopefully. Do you think that's it?
Yeah, I think so too. One of the other issues that we discussed was the leaving cert, which is
Yeah.
obviously not quite dyslexic, but it did give us an opportunity to raise one of the key issues that we really have here.
Mm.
So there's doing a review of how the leaving cert happens, what's going to happen next year. And if we were to go back to the exam-based system, which I think is slightly inappropriate, I believe it should be kind of based on the kind of over the years that's done module system, given the opportunity for children who can cope better with the exam pressures itself. We don't want to go into a 3-hour exam. That doesn't suit people who are dyslexic. Traditionally, we would have said to them that we need more time. Like the classic one is, if you are doing maths, they're probably quite good at maths, but the wording question would catch you out.
Mm.
So what we've actually said to the department, and there's probably a submission going to be made, is that the module-based system is the appropriate way forward, the continuous development, rather than having one pressurized exam over a 3-hour period. And that would level the playing pitch an awful lot for us.
Huge, yeah, make a huge dramatic impact, mainly for leaving cert, but obviously, from junior cert perspective,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's that pressure now, which is just there wasn't even really there, like even when I was schooling, and that wasn't that long ago. That like there's so many kids now prepping for the junior cert in second year as if it's the really really big hurdle and big challenge. So definitely having a more continuous based assessment ongoing. Now that has, I must say, they've definitely done a lot of work with that, with the CVAs and those projects
Mm.
that have been introduced over the last while, because they're new enough, they both for junior cert and for leaving cert. That's definitely kind of a new program and syllabus that is coming through, but definitely that to be accelerated an awful lot more and have it, predominantly done by the time you get to May, June, really alleviates that pressure.
And it kind of, because what's happening in the last 6 months, the
Mm.
debate about leaving cert has really accelerated.
Yeah.
And that has now given us an opportunity to say,
Massive.
we know this game is changing. If
Yeah.
it's changing, you have to incorporate us in this, because
Yeah.
last year when we met them, the idea about having a continuous assessment was really not on the tables.
Mm.
But what we were asking for then was extra time. We were saying
Mm.
it takes a child or an adult who's dyslexic longer to go through a paper, so give us extra time. We're looking for 10% extra. We've changed now. We're saying, look, it's a different game in town. We
Mm.
think we just need to change how it actually happens totally.
Mm. And I suppose that is the benefit. I know there's lots of drawbacks to the pandemic, but that is a benefit that, there's lots of scope now of how we actually move things and do things better. That certain systems really haven't worked and haven't worked in a long time. And it creates that more open-ended discussion that people are more willing to, oh, that isn't working, and we can kind of move for that now going forward. Whereas things that were somewhat working in some aspects, there wasn't that element to kind of, let's say, talk about new topics or discussion. So it is definitely a benefit of having that change and having that looked into from a leaving cert perspective. And again, look, it won't happen overnight. It won't happen, let's say, for next year's leaving certs or anything like that. But definitely it's something that can be put a plan in place to
Yeah,
really
and
help
it's
that.
important that that conversations after starting now,
Yeah.
and there's a realization within the department that that conversation is where it needs to go. Do you
Yeah.
know, like mental health, stress, all these things? Like, is there a need for it? Is there a better way of doing things?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to have that conversation. And I was very, very happy that meeting yesterday. It gave a kind of insight that the department in 12 months have moved an awful long way. They really have. There's a realization there that, look, things have to change. And even technology, like to me, technology, access to technology is one of the key drivers in change in this game. And the change in technology in the last 5 years, it's even hard to it's
Yeah.
change it's been a major change.
So many platforms and so many pieces of software, so many different avenues that will help students both in education and also students outside education. Like all of those general day-to-day tasks of, dictating on a phone and all of those type of things are so massively made so much easier now instead of handwriting it or doing those
Hmm.
traditional forms that generally speaking doesn't suit a lot of people with different ways of learning. So technology is definitely going to have a huge impact. And then, as you mentioned, it's the accessibility to it. So, do the
Yeah.
schools have it? Do they get given it themselves? Can they bring it home? It really is that use and becoming familiar, because that's, I suppose, is the most important aspect. Is like, say, a child being using or a student being using it on an ongoing basis. So it's not like, oh, here's on the day, here's your exam or your project to do, and here now is a new piece of technology or software. It's that training and it's that ongoing element to become familiar with it.
Yeah, and it takes time for every one of us, but like it does take time for the student to actually pick up to work in the software.
Yeah.
Like we see it at home now, like it's probably a month later, but Ellen now is really super on the software. But it takes that little bit of time to get into it,
Yeah.
and like it's a game changer. It really, really is. And I do think like it's like hearing aid for people. Like it really is. It gives the opportunity for children to actually hear exactly what's happening on that page. It makes it so much easier and it takes the stress out of it. And I think if we have the ability to get more access to technology, which we should, the changes that we'll have in this space will be major in a very, very short space of time.
Yeah, it's huge. And you were mentioning there about Ellen and I suppose that your background and personal experience. So maybe talk to us briefly about that and how you got involved in creating this awareness.
I suppose, look, I'm a parent like everyone else, and look, in particular, as my wife Catherine was the real driver in this. So we have 4 kids at home. We have 2 girls and 2 boys, and our first child went to school, and we just thought it was normal, what was happening. And we soon realized, well, not soon, maybe in maybe first class, that things weren't as normal as we thought they would have been. So basically, it was a learning curve for us, a learning curve for Ellen, and for, I suppose, the school itself. So we got support, we got help. We probably educated ourselves an awful lot of the way. And what we found the dyslexic workshops, and particularly Clonakilty, very, very helpful. They gave us a kind of an insight into how we can actually work through this process itself. And unfortunately, some of it is parents being advocates for their kids and, fighting for services and making sure that they actually get what they really want when it comes to actually services in the school. And we've been quite vocal in that, I suppose. And then I suppose I have another platform here in the Shannon, and I suppose I'm in a unique position. And when I had that platform, I definitely took the opportunity to work with the Dyslexic Association of Ireland, get as much interaction as we could, in particular Department of Education. And I think there's a lot of work that we need to do still. I'm working doing a private members bill about having dyslexic, having people who are dyslexic an actual right to services itself. Because at the moment, unfortunately, it's down to the advocate of the parent or the guardian fighting to make sure that the services are provided. We believe that should be in law. We believe there should be something done. And I believe I'm working with other people about trying to draft a private members bill around that to ensure that children and adults, and I think the adults in this space have been not forgotten, but we've a real kind of insight into what's required in the education system. But we need to start going back in and picking up the mistakes of the last 20, 30, 40 years to make sure we can pick up the people that weren't picked up. Because as we rightly mentioned earlier on, mental health, esteem, these are all huge issues, all linked to not just people who are dyslexic, but with other learning issues.
Massive, yeah, and it's so vital, I suppose, to have that slant and that lens on it, Tim, that not only do you have the awareness of it yourself and you've grown that awareness through your own personal background, but then driving that, because you understand that obviously Ellen and your own kids and then the kids in the classroom, you can see that firsthand. So having that, I suppose, awareness and ability and insight into these, you can see then from a different slant, oh, this could be done and this could be done, because you can kind of see it working within your own home and within their school itself.
Yeah, like one of the first things we did, like a child, like, the first child comes along, we taught Ellen the alphabet. And like in hindsight, it was the most useless piece of work we've ever did in our entire life, because it's all about sounds. It's all about, how you actually get that out there. And like, I honestly believe the first child syndrome is a big issue too. If you have the first child and, there is a learning issue, you probably don't pick it up because you expect this is normal. This is what happens. And it took the second child to nearly come along to realize, all right, maybe this isn't normal. So like, and it's not that it's not normal, but just a different way of taking the information. So yeah, it's been a learning curve over the last 11 years, I suppose now. But we've seen huge changes, and it's just about trying to continue that progress and about trying to make sure that we actually can get the platforms that are required. So like the amazing thing is, like, I have a sister who works in accountancy, and she says like she uses Google for everything, like like your iPad is your key thing, and we're all obsessed with your handwriting and your spelling and all this kind of stuff. There's logic in what we do. We have to make sure that logic is used on the ground.
Yeah, and it's so great to have, I suppose, that awareness and insight that you bring to it, and especially, I suppose, tying it all around now with Dyslexia Awareness Week, that there's so many different slants that people can take for parents and teachers and kids, to try and get involved and create their own element of awareness, because each person's learning difference is different. Basically,
Totally.
that's why it's different. So it's about everybody trying to, I suppose, pool together and work together from lots of different slants, from your slant, from the Dyslexic Association slant, and lots of different organizations and groups to help create that change.
Yeah, and I think it's about building that. It's about building that movement, and I think there's a great momentum there now. And I think I've seen that momentum, in particular in the last 2 or 3 years. And it's about they're the kind of foundations. Now we just need to build and go forward. And look, I have a unique position here that I'm doing my best to open as many doors as I can to make sure we can have that meaningful change.
And that's all really it takes, just people kind of coming together over time from different slants, and help how we kind of redraft and recreate systems, both for the kids, but as you mentioned, a really important aspect for the adults. Tim, thanks a million for joining us here today and for Dyslexia Awareness Week and help creating that change. If people have any questions or any insights, feel free to comment or to drop us an email or a message below if it's something more confidential. We're so delighted to have Tim on board with helping us make changes both in the systems in general. So really, really thankful for your time, Tim, for us.
Pleasure, and thank you very much.
You're
Thank you.
very good. Thank you.